The data which is provided in this video is old but still relevant.
Hello viewers, now let's examine the situation of Jews after Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, advent, as promised in our previous video. During the time when the Jewish community was encountering difficulties, in the meantime, in the deserts of Arabia, a simple and honest man with an outstanding character by the name Muhammad, peace be upon him, was chosen as the last and final prophet for mankind, and the Quran as the final message of the God was revealed to him. He was a descendant of Prophet Ishmael, the elder son of Prophet Abraham. God commanded Muhammad, peace be upon him, to propagate Islam, the religion of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and of all prophets, peace be upon them all, to all of humanity. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died in 632 CE, and within 5 years of his death in 637 CE, an army of his friends and followers arrived outside the walls of Jerusalem. The year 637 CE represents an important turning point in Palestine's history, for after this it came under Muslim control and was to remain under their control for the next 1300 years, except for a period of 88 years until the defeat of the Ottoman rule, the Ottoman Caliphate. This event brought peace and harmony to Palestine, which for centuries had been the scene of wars, exile, looting, and massacres. Under Muslim rule, however, its inhabitants, regardless of their beliefs, would live together in peace and harmony. Palestine came under the control of Muslims in 637-38 CE, under the Caliphate of Umar bin al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him. Karen Armstrong, in her book, A History of Jerusalem, One City, Three Faiths, describes the capture of Jerusalem by Umar in these terms. The Patriarch Sophronius rode out of the city to meet Umar and then escorted the Caliph back into Jerusalem. Umar also expressed the monotheistic ideal of compassion more than any previous conqueror of Jerusalem. He presided over the most peaceful and bloodless conquest that the city had yet seen in its long and often tragic history. Once the Christians had surrendered, there was no killing, no destruction of property, no burning of rival religious symbols, no expulsions or expropriations, and no attempt to force the inhabitants to embrace Islam. While Byzantine emperors had outlawed the Judaism and forced the Jews to the point of baptism, Umar invited them to settle in Jerusalem. The Muslims had not only liberated them from the oppression of Byzantium, but had also given them rights of permanent residence in their holy city. Unlike Christianity, which tried to suppress all rival religions, Islam from its very inception maintained a great degree of tolerance towards other faiths, so that members of all three great monotheistic religions of the world were able to live together in relative peace and harmony under the benevolent rule of Islam. The Jews, for example, who were being hounded to death or treated as second-class citizens in Christian Europe, enjoyed a rich cultural renaissance of their own and, like the Christians, were allowed full religious liberty throughout the Islamic Empire. This peace and harmony lasted until the Crusaders' invasion in the 11th CE. Following Pope Urban II's call on 27 Nov 1095 at the Council of Clermont, more than 100,000 Europeans set out for Palestine to free the Holy Land from the Muslims and find the fabled wealth of the East. They reached Jerusalem in 1099. The city fell after a siege of nearly 5 weeks. When the Crusaders moved in, they carried out a savage slaughter. For 3 days, the Crusaders systematically slaughtered about 40,000 inhabitants of Jerusalem and occupied their houses. 10,000 Muslims who had sought sanctuary on the roof of the Aqsa Mosque were brutally massacred, and Jews were rounded up into their synagogue and put to the sword. There were scarcely any survivors. The streets literally ran with blood. Piles of heads, hands, and feet were to be seen, says an eyewitness Raymond of Aguiles, a crusader. With no shame, he says, "If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say this much at least, that in the temple and the porch of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. The peace and harmony in Palestine, which had lasted since Umar, ended in a terrible slaughter. The Crusaders made Jerusalem their capital and established a Latin kingdom stretching from Palestine to Antioch. It was under their occupation for only 88 years when Salahuddin defeated them at the Battle of Hattim in 1187. 3 months after the Battle of Hattin, 2nd October 1187, Salahuddin entered Jerusalem. In contrast to the Crusaders' liberation of Jerusalem, Salahuddin did not touch one Christian in the city. He merely ordered some Latin Christians to leave Jerusalem. The Orthodox Christians who were not Crusaders were allowed to stay and worship as they chose. Salahuddin conquered the city. According to the highest Islamic ideals, he did not take revenge for the 1099 massacre. Salahuddin also invited the Jews to come back to Jerusalem, from where they had been almost entirely excluded by the Crusaders. He was hailed throughout the Jewish world as a new Cyrus. Stanley Lane Poole writes, "Fortunate were the merciless, for they obtained mercy at the hands of the Muslim Sultan, and if the taking of Jerusalem were the only fact known about Salahuddin, it were enough to prove him the most chivalrous and great-hearted conqueror of his own, and perhaps of any age." French historian Rev. Grousset writes about Salahuddin, "It is equally true that his generosity, his piety, devoid of fanaticism, that flower of liberality and courtesy which had been the model of our old chroniclers, won him no less popularity in Frankish Syria than in the lands of Islam." The fall of Jerusalem into Muslim hands was a severe blow to the Jews who were waiting for a Messiah, prophet, as is prophesied in the Torah. That this prophecy had already come true in the form of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was something they rejected only on the ground that he was not a Jew, that is from Isaac's side, but an Arab, means from Ishmael's side. Totally frustrated, although well tolerated, the Jews slowly began shifting to Europe. It was under Muslim influence, historians acknowledge, that the growing Christian kingdoms of Europe learned to tolerate the Jews who laid their foundation in Europe. Without land, they became artisans and tradesmen. They also took charge of the trade of usury, which was banned for the Christians by the Church, and were soon controlling trade and commerce to the envy of the Christians. It was not long before the Jews discovered that they were not wanted in Europe. A wave of anti-Jewish feeling swept through the whole of Western Europe. By the end of the 13th century, Jews were completely expelled from Britain and France. The whole of the 14th century witnessed wild massacres of Jews in Spain, a place where they had enjoyed a lot of freedom and peace since the coming of Muslim armies in the 8th century and the subsequent Muslim rule for about 800 years. In 1496, they were expelled from Portugal as well. Thereafter, many adopted Christianity. Some went to Eastern Europe, while some opted to go to Muslim Turkey, where once again they were well tolerated. They are still there in large numbers. With the dawn of the 19th century, the government and people of Western Europe learned to tolerate their existence as small minorities. Enterprising Jews took advantage of the situation to move in and carve a place for themselves in the fast-growing industrial economy. But the large masses living in Eastern Europe, Romania, Hungary, East Germany, Poland, and Russia were assigned to ghettos, discriminated against and hated by the sons of the Renaissance. The Jews accepted their lot with quiet suffering, waiting for the Messiah who would lead them to final triumph over the infidels and get them back the promised land, Palestine. They finally saw their opportunity when Palestine came under British occupation, with the defeat and end of the Ottoman Empire and Caliphate in 1917. With this target firmly in mind, the Jews began exercising their influence in the European press for a homeland in Palestine, for which they coined a slogan, "A land without people for a people without land." They would not miss any opportunity to suggest to the British and French that with their withdrawal, sooner or later, given the Arab temper, all previous exercises carried out to break up the Ottoman Empire and Muslim unity would come to naught if a friendly people such as Jews were not left behind in firm control at the heart of Middle East Palestine. Gradually, the idea of a permanent Western outpost in the Middle East caught the imagination of politicians in Europe, and plans began being laid down to transform the fantasy into reality. Europe had at last found a final solution to the Jewish problem. In 1917, England announced in its Balfour Declaration that His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. In Palestine. The Balfour Declaration was bitterly opposed by Edwin Montagu, the only Jewish member of the British cabinet at the time. Montagu registered his profound disagreement with Balfour and with the philosophy of Zionism in general. Reflecting on Balfour's promise, Montagu wrote, "I do not know what this involves, but I assume that it means that Muslims and Christians are to make way for the Jews, and that the Jews should be put in all positions of preference, and should be peculiarly associated with Palestine in the same way that England is with the English, or France is with the French, that Turks and other Mohammedans in Palestine will be regarded as foreigners, just in the same way as Jews will hereafter be treated as foreigners in every country but Palestine. Perhaps also citizenship must be granted only as a result of a religious test. Such a test," he added, "seems to me to be only admitted by those who take a bigoted and narrow view of one epoch of the history of Palestine and claim for the Jews a position to which they are not entitled." There were mainly 4 factors that led to the creation of the State of Israel. The first is the disunity among the Arabs Muslims, who were bitten by the bug of nationalism, which is how Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Libya, Sudan, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and all other states of the Gulf, including the Yemen, were created, which made it easy for the Westerners to create their colonies on Arab lands. The second is the conspiracy and futuristic plan of the US, Europe, and even Russia to have a friendly state, Israel, in the midst of oil-rich Arabs to create pressure and blackmail them as and when required. The third reason is the relentless persecution of Jews by the people of Europe. And the fourth is the Jewish belief in the promised land that Yahweh, God, had promised to prophet Abraham. The greatest hurdle in the creation of Israel was, however, the fact that the Palestine that everyone spoke of was not an empty stretch of land. A survey carried out in 1917 showed that it was inhabited by 700,000 people, 92% Arabs and 8% Jewish. Of the total land area of 26,320,000 acres, the Jews owned less than 1% at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1919, King Crane Commission, appointed by the US President Wilson, report, no British officer consulted by the commissioners believed that the Zionist program could be carried out except by force of arms. They warned, the officers generally thought a force of not less than 50,000 soldiers would be required, even to initiate the program. That in itself is evidence of a strong sense of the injustice of the Zionist program. Despite such great obstacles and impending injustice, the US went ahead. Having received the official support of the Balfour Declaration, the Zionists began to encourage Jewish migration to Palestine, even by force when necessary. Approximately 100,000 Jews migrated to Palestine between 1920 to 1929. The Zionist organizations had complete control over this migration. Jews who set foot in Palestine were met by Zionist groups, who determined where they would stay and what type of work they would do. As a result, the Jewish population in Palestine recorded extensive growth in terms of numbers and settlements. According to official records, the number of Jewish immigrants to Palestine increased from 100,000 in the 1920s to 232,000 in the 1930s. As of 1939, the Palestinian population of 1.5 million included 445,000 Jews. Their numbers, which had represented just about 10% of the population 20 years earlier, now accounted for 30% of the population. Jewish settlements also expanded rapidly, and by 1939, the Jews owned twice the amount of land that they had owned in the 1920s. As of 1947, there were 630,000 Jews in Palestine and 1.3 million Palestinians. On November 29, 1947, a resolution was hurriedly presented by Britain and passed in the newly formed United Nations organization under the Western influence that it still is, partitioning Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. All Western countries, including Russia, voted in favor in the count of 33 to 13, with 10 abstention. The killing of millions of Jews by Hitler created a strong wave of sympathy for Jews and helped them strengthen the creation of Israel. Before the Israeli government was founded, a reign of terror was let loose by the Jewish terrorist organizations, the Haganah, Irgun, and Stern gangs, and were responsible for removing the Palestinians from their lands. These terrorist organizations prior to 1948 and the Israeli army after 1948 conducted a terrorist campaign on Arab civilians. Menachem Begin, the Irgun's leader and a future Prime Minister of Israel, played a key role in this campaign and killings of innocent Palestinians. Dear viewers, let's wrap up this video here. Stay tuned for a sneak peek at massacres perpetrated by the Israeli army and terrorist organizations in the upcoming video. Thank you,